Hello everyone, my name is Avant and I'm a recent graduate of the MEng program at UIUC. And today I'm going to focus on the final project of TE566, which is Finance for Engineering Management. And it's a class which counts in the professional development part of the MEng curriculum. So you can have a look at the syllabus online. I won't delve into that too much right now, but I will talk about the two certificates that you could get from the Technology Entrepreneurship Center. The first of which is the Business Management for Engineers, which is a 6-credit certificate, and you can do this embedded in your MEng program at UIUC. If you take TE566, which is what I'm talking about, it will satisfy your third requirement, which is complete at least 2 credit hours of all of these. And TE566 is a 2-credit class, but just keep in mind that it lasts for the first half of the semester, and for the time that it does last, it feels like a 4-credit class. Granted, given that it only lasts the first half of the semester, its overall worth is 2 credits. And the other certificate you can get is Strategic Technology Management. And this is a 7-credit certificate, and similarly, you can also embed this into your MEng program without having to take more than 32 credits to satisfy the MEng requirement, as well as pick up the certificate on the way, whichever one of these two you choose to apply for and complete. Now I'm going to head into my program, which is cumulative in the sense that it uses all the knowledge that you've learned in the whole semester into the final project. You won't be forced to use any particular software, but you can choose any software that you are comfortable with, and I would highly recommend use one that you're already familiar with as opposed to learning a new software for the purpose of this project. My weapon of choice is Excel because I've been familiar with it for some time, and I felt that using a macro-enabled workbook and using Visual Basic for applications in Excel, I was able to do a lot of macros which mostly just involve copy-pasting certain data and numbers from one page to another, and that's a simple thing to do with macros. But keep in mind, in this video, I do not intend for you to use this to cheat per se, so I will not show you any of my formulae or my macros, but the purpose of this video is to show you and demonstrate what my spreadsheet does. So now let's get into it. There's a fictional company called Avance Toy Trucks. That's me, my toy truck company. There's an action page which I'll come back to eventually, but first I want to show you what each page stores. So I have employee data. This is pretty standard. You have an ID. Each person has a first name, last name, a full address with a zip code, a social security number, and a salary. I've also programmed my macros to simply take me from one page to another on this little sidebar over here, so it's easy access for me as opposed to clicking on all these tabs at the bottom. Next I have the customer data, and you have a company name and the contact's first name and last name, their address, their zip code, and their price. And similarly, you have vendor data, which is also just company name, the part that they sell, the price for 1 unit of that part, and again the address with the city, state, and zip code. Then I have the inventory, where I keep track of the different parts that I have. So I have the part name, I have that part's cost per unit, I keep track of how many of these parts I have at the moment, the overall value by multiplying the quantity by the price to find out the value of those particular parts, reorder, which simply shows me an X if I currently have less than, I think, 6,000 of that particular part, which I can change individually, of course, for the parts that use more number of parts per truck that I have to produce. As you can see in my F column, I can change the number of parts before I need to reorder. Then I have the cost per truck for the particular part, which is a function of the number of parts I need of that particular part to make one truck, as well as the cost for one part. And I simply add those values together to get the total cost of one truck. Over here, my total of parts is simply the total value that I currently hold in my D column. My COG, which is my cost of good per unit, as I showed over here, is the sum of the number of parts multiplied by the price per unit, all added together. My current units producible. So for that, what I have to do is find out what's the limiting factor in terms of my number of parts I need for each truck compared to how many I have, and find the lowest of those values. Initial units, I think I have 500,000. Or is that 5 million? Sorry. Yeah. My total invoiced, that has to do with my invoice page, which is simply how many I've already invoiced in that page. And the complete units in stock is how many I started off with, which is my initial, minus out how many I have invoiced. And my total value of complete units is how many units I have in stock multiplied by the cost that it takes to make those units. Then I have the payroll history, where I keep track of when I've paid my employees, who I paid, how much I paid them, that's the salary, the disbursement, the amount that actually went to them after the total withholding was subtracted, which is simply the sum of the next four, technically 5, but bounds is 0, the next 4 columns. The federal tax withheld, and basically each of these 4 columns are the percentage that you see above it multiplied by the salary. And when you add those up, you get the total withholding, and then the disbursement simply becomes the salary minus the total withholding. Then I have the balance sheet and the income statement. And you'll learn about this for sure in the first month of taking the class, where I keep track of my cash, my accounts receivable, and ultimately I get my total assets and my total liabilities, and these together will give me my net worth. And my income statement is here, which takes into account all my sales and my expenses, and ultimately will produce my net income. Then I have the invoice history. Every time I have a new invoice, it'll automatically give me a new invoice number, which is like an index. It'll take the date, and I'll show you this functionality very soon. It takes the date, and it takes the customer name and the quantity I type, and it will automatically find out the price per part by looking it up in the table that I showed you earlier in the inventory. And the total is simply the quantity times the price per part. Now, of course, that depends on how much I'm selling to the particular customer, because that's also VLOOKUP up. Then I have the purchase order history. Similarly, I keep my index number, I keep track of the date of the purchase order, the supplier, and actually when I make a purchase order for a particular part, the supplier, I think it's the other way around. When I choose a supplier, the part which that particular supplier supplies to me is automatically added to this table. The quantity is one that I can choose to enter. And the price per part, similarly, is done by a VLOOKUP. And the total is found by multiplying the last 2 columns. Okay, so far we've seen what I store in each of my tabs. Now let me demonstrate to you the functionalities of my program. So first, I'm going to add an employee, which I can do by going to my employee data tab and clicking Add Employee over here. Then I click on New, and over here I see that I've already got 5 employees, so I'm going to have a 6th employee, and I'm going to employ Harry Potter, and he has an address 1 and the second line of the address. His city is Urbana in the state of Illinois with a zip code, and he has an SSN, and he has a salary of $250,000. I click on New, and it adds this entry into the table. And if I want to add or edit data, I can simply add them over here by typing into the correct box. Okay, now I go to my Customer Data tab, and just like we did before, I'm going to click on Add Customer, and in a similar fashion, I just click on New, and I type in my data over here, and then I'll hit New again. Then I have my vendor data, and again, in the same fashion, I just click on Add Vendor, I click on New, I type my data, and I hit New again, and it'll put in a new record. Now if I go to my balance sheet, I can see that I have $1 million in cash. So being the nice boss that I am, I'm going to pay my employees by going to my action page and going to the select employee under the pay employee section. And as you can see, because I just employed Harry Potter, Potter appears over here. So first, before I pay them, let me decide who to pay. If I go to Payroll History, Potter has not been paid because I just employed him, but I'll still be kind enough to give him some money now. And Wayne over here was last paid on 31st of Jan. So I'll pay these 2 employees. I come over here and I click on Potter and I pay the employee, and I click on Wayne and I pay employee. Now I want to see that they've been paid, so I click on Payroll History, which is very conveniently in the same place that I just paid them. And as you can see here, on 31st Jan, we paid Potter with a salary of $250K, which we just assigned him. And everything else to the right of that in the grid was calculated based just off the fact that I chose to pay Potter. And similarly for Wayne, his salary was paid and his date was chosen to be 28th of Feb. And the way this was selected was that the program already knows that Wayne was paid on the last day of Jan. So the next time I want to pay him, it'll automatically pay him on the last day of Feb, which is the 2nd month. And in the same fashion for Graham, the program already knew that after I paid him the first 2 months on the last day of each, the 3rd time I pay him, it'll pay him on the last day of the 3rd month, which is March. So that's how the dates work. And if you go back to the balance sheet, because I paid my employees money, the cash has gone down by the total amount of which I just paid those 2 employees. So now back to my action page. The next thing I want to do is I want to make an invoice. So I select my customer, and let's say I choose Walmart, and I choose the quantity to be 30,000, and I give it a date, and I click on Create Invoice. Then the macro does its job, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what the macro did, but basically it copied some data to somewhere and it processed it, and it showed me a resulting data in the correct place. But how exactly that works is for you to figure out. So I click on Invoice History, and I can see that my invoice was successfully done because it gave an invoice number. It took the date and the customer name and the quantity which I just chose, and the price per part was taken from the table which I showed you earlier, and the total was calculated by multiplying these 2 numbers. And now because I have an invoice of $75,000, if I click on the balance sheet now, my accounts receivable has become $75,000 because it's based off what happened in the invoice history. Now let's say it's the last day of the month, and as we head into the new month, I want to use the function over here which is called net30. And what that does is it increases the cash by the account receivable, and then the account receivable becomes 0. Now basically what that means is that the cash has increased by the amount that the accounts receivable was. So as you can see over here, keep track of the numbers. It's 655K and 75K. When I click net30, the accounts receivable will become 0 and the cash will be the sum of those two. You can think of it like the accounts receivable just got transferred into the cash. However, the total current assets did not change because it's simply a sum of all of these. So it doesn't matter what it gets counted in as, but the sum will be the same. Great. Now while I'm here, I have this button over here which is called $1 million in cash. And if I click it, it changes my cash to be exactly $1 million. And I wish I had that in real life, but the real world doesn't work like that. But at least on my spreadsheet, I have that button. Now back to my action page. The last functionality I want to show you is the purchase order. So first I go to my inventory and I just have a look at this and I say windshield. Let's say I want to have more windshields. I want to have 9,000, but I currently have 5,000. So I go to my action page. I select my part to be windshield and I let my quantity be 4,000 because that'll take me from 5,000 to 9,000, and I choose a date and I create the purchase order. Now if I look at the purchase order history, I have an index number for the new entry, I have the date which I wrote, the part name which I wrote, and the quantity which I chose. But the fact that it was Acme Plastics who sold me the windshields was basically done by a VLOOKUP, by finding out the supplier that supplies the windshields to me. And the price per part was taken from the same table, and the total was found by multiplying these two values. And if I look at my inventory, I can see that indeed I do have 9,000 windshield, whereas I used to have 5,000. So I basically ordered the extra 4,000, and everything else over here got updated. And if I go to my balance sheet, I can see that my inventory has actually increased. I forgot to make a note of what value it was, but it did actually increase. Now it's 43,050. And basically it found out the value by which my inventory increased, and it increased my inventory value by that. And that does, of course, recalculate into all of this and change my total assets, and it changes my total net worth, basically. Great. So that's what I have for you in this video. I highly recommend that you take TE566. I think it's a useful class to have. And it's one that will help you to get your TE certificates, which are also very useful to have, be it you want to become employed, you want to enter the corporate world, or you want to have your own business. I would recommend gaining this knowledge. And if you are currently enrolled in TE566, then I hope that this video was useful for you. Now the TA will go through one lecture on his own where he will explain to you what the whole spreadsheet needs to do. Not spreadsheet necessarily, but your program needs to do. Again, you're not forced to use Excel or a spreadsheet software. You can use MATLAB, or you can use whichever other programming language you're familiar with. But I think that I hope that this video was a good supplement for you in terms of understanding what the program needs to do as part of your final project. So thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.